The ship came on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. No fire across the sky, no shaking ground, no warning sirens going off in the night. It simply appeared above Geneva at 9:47 in the morning, the way a boot appears above an ant. One moment the sky was blue and open and full of ordinary clouds. The next moment there was a ship in it. 3.2 kilometers long, silver gray, shaped like something between a cathedral and a knife. Every camera on Earth turned toward it. Every screen in every home, every office, every hospital waiting room. 7 billion people stopped what they were doing and looked up at screens showing the same thing, that ship, hanging there, not moving, not making a sound, just waiting with the particular patience of something that has never once had to hurry. It waited for 2 hours. Then it opened. The being that stepped out was called a HFY, though nobody on Earth knew that yet. She was tall and thin and moved with a kind of unhurried grace that made the soldiers standing near the landing zone feel somehow embarrassed to exist. She had 4 arms. Her skin was pale gold. Her eyes were completely black, like 2 stones pulled from the bottom of a very deep lake. She had done this 214 times. She knew exactly how it went. The species always looked the same at this moment. Small, uncertain, standing in groups the way animals stand when they sense something large nearby, shoulders touching, weight slightly back, the biological vocabulary of creatures trying to decide between running and standing still. She scanned the welcoming party with instruments built into the ship's relay sensors and read their biology the way a doctor reads a chart. Elevated stress chemicals, increased heart rate, subtle trembling in the extremities, the eyes doing that mammalian thing where they can't settle on one point and keep moving, keep checking, keep looking for an exit. Fear, clean and recognizable, like a smell. She found it almost tender. She had delivered the ultimatum 214 times across 7 star systems. In 3,000 years of conclave expansion, it had never failed. The species always came to the table. The species always, in the end, understood. Because the ultimatum was not a threat. It was an offer. A carefully constructed, carefully translated, centuries-refined document that acknowledged a species' achievements, noted their potential, and offered them a place inside the largest, most stable civilization the galaxy had produced. It was generous, it was reasonable. And the alternative, written into the final section in language, so clean and clear, it couldn't be misunderstood, was not. The meeting room inside the UN building had a round table, because humans still believed in the symbolism of round tables. A HFY found this charming in a distant way, the way you find a child's drawing charming, earnest, slightly uninformed, but full of good intention. 12 people sat across from her. She had studied human body language extensively during the 2-hour wait, cross-referencing the conclave's 14,000-year observation record on Earth. She knew how to read a human face. She knew the difference between diplomatic calm and genuine calm. She scanned the 12 faces. 11 of them were performing calm, doing it well but performing. The 12th was Dr. Nadia Osai. Dr. Osai was 58 years old. She wore a blazer that the conclave's materials analyzer priced at approximately 40 of Earth's currency units, which was notable mainly because every other human in the room was wearing something that cost between 10 and 40 times that amount. She had close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where important things were said. She was holding a ceramic mug. The mug had text printed on it. The translation database returned, world's okayest diplomat. Human humor subtype, self-deprecating. A HFY noted it and moved on. She began the ultimatum. It took 40 minutes to deliver in full. This was standard. The conclave's translation systems were excellent. Dr. Osai and the 11 others heard it in perfect English, nuance intact, no meaning lost. HFY spoke about the galactic conclave's history, about the 49 species under its care, about the stability it provided, the protection, the shared infrastructure of interstellar civilization. She spoke about Earth, its achievements, its long and complicated history, its biological and cultural richness that the conclave would be proud to absorb and preserve. She spoke clearly and without condescension about what membership in the conclave would mean for Earth. Access to technology centuries beyond what humanity currently possessed. Protection from the dangers of a galaxy that was, in certain sectors, not as organized as the conclave's space. A voice, limited, advisory but real in certain conclave proceedings. And then, because the ultimatum was an honest document, she spoke about the alternative. She did not dwell on it, she did not dramatize it. She stated it plainly, the way you state the weather. The room was very quiet when she finished. Outside, Geneva went about its morning. Someone was mowing a lawn somewhere. A bus horn sounded 2 blocks away. Dr. Osei took a long sip from her mug. She looked at HFY across the table, not with fear, not with calculation, with the kind of direct, quiet attention that HFY had learned over 214 deliveries usually preceded a species senior diplomat asking one of 3 predictable questions. She waited for one of the 3 questions. Dr. Osei smiled. It was not one of the smiles HFY's database had catalogued. It wasn't the diplomatic smile, the one that lived in the mouth and not in the eyes. It wasn't the nervous smile, which involved too much teeth and happened too fast. It wasn't the smile of relief that species sometimes showed when they heard the terms and found them survivable. It lived behind the eyes, settled there, like something that had been waiting. "Thank you," Dr. Osei said. Her voice was perfectly level. "We'll need 48 hours." HFY granted it. She always granted the final request. It gave the species time to prepare their populations, to process the information, to move through whatever stages of grief or acceptance or bureaucratic procedure they needed to move through before the formal response. It was the civilized thing. She returned to her ship. She filed the preliminary report with the conclave homeworld. Ultimatum delivered to species 215, Type 1.4 civilization, single system, standard response window granted. And then, because she was thorough, because she had learned over centuries of this work that details sometimes mattered, she reviewed the biometric scan data from the meeting room. 11 members of the human delegation. Stress chemistry charted, catalogued, filed. Then the 12th. Dr. Osei's readings were different. The stress markers were there. HFY had expected them, the cortisol, the elevated pulse, the small physical tells of a creature that is afraid and working very hard not to show it. Those were present, normal, expected. But under them, beneath the fear response, something the scan had filed as an anomaly and set aside. She pulled it back up. She ran it again. The anomaly was relief. Not the relief that comes after fear ends, not the relief of a burden lifted, something that had been present before the meeting began and had intensified during the ultimatum's delivery, a sustained biological expression of tension releasing. As if something that had been held for a very long time had finally, at the moment of the ultimatum's delivery, been allowed to set down. 48 hours of relief. HFY looked at the data for a long time. She looked at the scan from Dr. Osei's hand, the hand holding the mug, and noted that the grip pressure had actually decreased when the alternative section of the ultimatum was read aloud. The part that was supposed to produce fear had produced calm. She closed the file. Biological noise, almost certainly. Stress responses in carbon-based species were complex and sometimes counterintuitive. She had seen stranger readings. She had seen species laugh at the moment of the ultimatum's delivery. She had seen one species on record applaud. It always meant the same thing. overwhelm, processing, the body doing something irrational because the mind was too full. Relief almost certainly. She set a reminder to review the final response in 47 hours and 59 minutes and turned her attention to other things. Dr. Ose walked back through the UN corridor with her mug and her $40 blazer, and the 11 other people who were all talking at once. Some of them were very pale. Some of them were moving their hands too much. One of the younger ones, a deputy attaché from the South American delegation, was staring at his phone without reading it, the screen lighting and darkening as his hand kept activating it. She walked past them. She walked to a side room, small, no windows, 3 folding chairs and a table that had seen better decades, and she closed the door. The room had a phone on the table, the kind with a cord, the kind that connected to exactly one number, routed through 6 separate encrypted channels, and had never once been used for anything ordinary. She sat down, she took one more sip from the mug. The coffee was cold now, she drank it anyway. Then she picked up the phone. There was someone on the other end immediately. They had been waiting. They had been waiting for a long time. She said 4 words. "Tell them to wake." Then she set the phone down. Outside the room, she could hear her colleagues in the corridor, the urgent voices, the questions, the sound of people trying to understand what had just happened to their species. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying quietly under their breath in a language she recognized from her childhood. She looked at the mug, at the words on the side. World's okayest diplomat. She had bought it as a joke. Years ago at an airport gift shop in Accra, running late for a flight, grabbing the first mug she saw. She had brought it to every meeting since because it kept her honest. Because it reminded her what she was, not a hero, not a savior, not a symbol. Just someone who showed up and did the work. She stood up, smoothed her blazer. 47 hours and 59 minutes. She had a lot to do. In space, in the dark between Earth and Jupiter, in the cold, and the silence where nothing had ever been visible and nothing had ever moved. Things began to wake up. There were no lights, no signals, no broadcasts. They did not announce themselves. They did not communicate with Earth's surface or with a Chauvel's ship or with anyone. They simply powered on, one after another, hull by hull, deck by deck, systems clicking alive in the dark the way a sleeping animal's breathing changes when it starts to stir. Thousands of them. In the asteroid belt, in the shadow of Jupiter's mass, in the cold dark side of the moon where no tourist had ever stood, in the deep Martian caves that geologists had catalogued, and then, following a very specific set of instructions signed 40 years ago, quietly never catalogued again. Black hulls, no running lights, each one carrying on its forward surface a single symbol painted in matte gray so it could only be seen up close. A closed fist. Not raised, not threatening, just closed. Waiting. In the largest of these ships, hull designation 1, name stenciled below the fist in letters that had never been photographed or broadcast, a woman sat down in a chair. Her name was Yeva Morozova. She was 61 years old and had spent the last 22 years preparing for a moment she was not entirely certain would ever come. Her communications officer turned from his station. "Admiral, we have the signal." She looked at the dark view screen, at the stars outside, at nothing for a moment, or what looked like nothing to anyone who didn't know what was sitting in that dark. "I know," she said. Her voice had the texture of gravel on frozen ground, the particular tone of someone who has made a decision so thoroughly and so long ago that the moment of its arrival produces no drama, just acknowledgement. "New ICHTO. So what?" "Begin pre-flight checks," she said, "all wings." Outside in the dark, the black Armada waited. 47 hours and 53 minutes. It had waited 40 years. It could wait a little longer. The official response came at exactly 47 hours and 59 minutes. Not 48 hours. Not 47 hours and change. 47 hours and 59 minutes, as if someone had set a timer and was watching it with their thumb on the button. HFY had been awake for 31 of those hours. She told herself this was routine. She had waited out many response windows, had spent many hours in the stillness of her ship above foreign planets while their people moved through their private grief and arrived, inevitably, at the correct decision. She had not been sleeping well. She took the channel the moment it opened. Dr. Osai's face appeared on the screen. The blazer again. The mug, still carrying the mug as if she and it were a single unit, as if they had a contract. The background behind her was plain, a wall, a light source, no windows, deliberately bare. This too HFY noted and filed. "Humanity has considered your offer," Dr. Osai said. "Yes," HFY said. "We decline." HFY processed this for a moment. The translator confirmed the word. She ran it twice. Decline. Not asterisk, we need more time, which had happened twice, in 214 deliveries, and had always resolved within a week. Not we have conditions, which happened more often and was always negotiable. Not we need clarification, which was the most common response, and was usually the species looking for a way to say yes while saving face. Decline. The word sat in the space between them like a stone, dropped into still water. HFY said, very calmly, "I want to make certain the translation was accurate. You are declining the offer of membership in the Galactic Conclave." "That's correct." "And you understand the section of the ultimatum that addresses the alternative." "We do." "And you are declining that as well." Dr. Osai took a sip from her mug. "We're declining everything." HFY looked at her. She looked at the face of this woman in the $40 blazer holding a ceramic mug and telling a 3,000-year-old interstellar civilization that humanity had considered its offer and was not interested. "Dr. Osai," she said, and kept her voice very even, "I want to be sure you understand what this means." "I understand perfectly," Dr. Osai said. She set the mug down for the first time. "And I want you to understand something." She looked directly at the camera, at HFY, through the screen, through the distance, through 3,000 years of conclave certainty. "Look outside," she said. HFY turned to her sensor array. The array covered a sphere of space 2 billion kilometers in diameter. It was the finest military detection equipment the conclave had produced. It could track a single ship moving at 60% of light speed. It could read the heat signature of an engine that had been cold for 2 hours. It could count, simultaneously, up to 4,000 separate contacts before its processing systems began to struggle. She looked at the array. For one full second, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then she understood. And then she wished she didn't. They were coming out of the dark from every direction. Out of Jupiter's shadow, which her sensors had always read as empty, because Jupiter is large and magnetic and complicated, and because whatever was hiding in that shadow had been designed, specifically, to be unreadable inside Jupiter's interference field. Out of the asteroid belt, where her long-range scans had cataloged rock and ice and the occasional mining signature for decades. Out of places on the lunar surface that her charts listed as geologically inactive. Out of Mars. They were black, not dark gray, not low-visibility dark blue. Black. The kind of black that isn't a color so much as an absence, as if someone had taken ship-shaped pieces of space and decided to move them. Her optical sensors kept struggling to resolve them because they had no running lights, no navigation markers, no signals of any kind, nothing that said asterisk here I am asterisk in any language her equipment spoke. The only thing visible was the symbol on each hull. She zoomed in. The closed fist, painted in matte gray, invisible at distance, legible only when you were close enough that the distance had stopped mattering. Her sensor array began to count. It reached 4,000 contacts and started to slow. It reached 4,000 contacts and started to strain. It reached 4,000 contacts, held for 3 seconds and crashed. The screen went dark, then it rebooted, then it crashed again. She switched to manual optical tracking and started counting herself. She stopped at 500 because her hands were not quite steady, and she needed them to be steady. Lieutenant Commander Deo Ademi had been at his station for 19 hours. He had eaten 2 protein bars and a cup of instant noodles that had come out of the heating unit at a temperature best described as *aspirational*. He had filed 6 status reports, double-checked 4 separate systems 3 times each, and had a brief, sincere argument with himself about whether the 3rd protein bar constituted dinner or a sign of personal failure. He was on the UNSS Consequence hull designation 1, the flagship. He had been assigned to this ship 2 years ago and had spent those 2 years knowing, in the abstract, what it was for, and finding that the abstract and the concrete were very different animals. When the activation signal came, not a transmission, not a voice order, just a single encrypted pulse sent from Earth that every ship in the fleet had been programmed to receive and recognize. He felt it move through the ship before any alarm sounded. A vibration in the hull. Systems waking up around him like a house turning its lights on one room at a time. He read the signal confirmation on his screen. He set down the noodles. He straightened his collar. He did not know why. There was no one looking at him. It was a reflex, the body reaching for dignity at the moment the body understands something real is happening. Right asterisk, he thought, family reunion. Admiral, he said, signal confirmed, fleet is live. From the captain's chair, Admiral Morozova said nothing for a moment. She was looking at the forward view screen, which showed the dark and the stars, and, if you knew what to look for, the shapes of thousands of ships becoming visible as their systems powered on. Navigation status, she said. All wings report ready. Communications. All wings confirm receipt of activation. She was quiet for another second. Then, get me the conclave ship. HFY took the channel. She had composed herself. She was 3,000 years of civilization. She was the finest diplomat the conclave had produced in 500 years. She had sat across from 214 species at the worst moment of their history and remained steady, calm, and clear. She took the channel and looked at the face on the screen, sharp-featured, dark-skinned, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had made its decisions a long time ago and was simply watching them execute, and said, "What is this?" Morozova looked at her. Something passed across her face that wasn't anger and wasn't satisfaction and wasn't cruelty. Something older than all of those things. Our answer was no, she said. We wanted to be specific. This fleet is not a threat, Morozova said. It is an answer. You asked us to choose between submission and destruction. We are telling you that those were never our only choices. We made a third one. HFY said, you cannot have built this. We built it in the asteroid belt mostly, Morozova said. Some of it behind Jupiter, some on the Moon, some on Mars. We started 40 years ago. A pause. We are very good at building things when we have a reason. We have monitored this system for 14,000 years, yes. Morozova's voice didn't change, didn't rise. We know. We read about it in the documents your forward scout left on Titan 18 years ago. That was what started the clock, if you want to know. HFY's sensors were still crashing and rebooting. The count was somewhere above 5,000 now. The number meant nothing in isolation. What it meant was everything. What do you want? HFY said. Morozova considered this. It was a real consideration, not a dramatic pause, not a performance. She actually thought about the question, as if she hadn't been asked it before and wanted to answer it correctly. "To not be afraid anymore," she said. "We've been afraid for a very long time." She closed the channel. On Earth, people were watching screens. Not the feeds showing the conclave ship above Geneva. Those were still running, still broadcasting the image of the silver-gray shape hanging over the city like a question that had been asked and not yet answered. They were watching something else now. Someone had pointed a deep space telescope at Jupiter and fed the image to a public satellite, and the image was spreading across every network on the planet with the speed of something that cannot be stopped once it starts. In it, you could see them. Just barely dark shapes against the dark, more felt than seen, like standing in a room and knowing there is something large in the corner before your eyes have adjusted enough to see it clearly. Thousands of them. In Lagos, a man who had worked in a shipyard for 30 years and had signed documents he was not allowed to discuss watched the screen in his kitchen and put both hands flat on the table and breathed out slowly, as if he had been holding that breath for a decade. In Oslo, a woman who had spent her career as an orbital engineer and had taken a research posting on the moon 15 years ago, a posting that turned out to involve rather more welding than research, sat in her apartment and felt, for the first time in a long time, like she could stop tensing her shoulders. In Manila, in Sao Paulo, in Chennai, in 100,000 living rooms and offices and bars and hospital corridors, people watched the dark shapes moving in the space beyond the moon and felt something that the psychologists would spend years trying to correctly name. It wasn't pride exactly. It was the feeling that comes before pride. The feeling of realizing that something you had believed and never been able to prove had turned out to be true. HFY sent a transmission to the conclave homeworld. It was brief, because she had nothing elaborate to say, and because brevity felt more honest than ceremony. The species declined the ultimatum. They have revealed a military force of undetermined scale. I am unable to provide a contact count. I recommend immediate council session. She sent it and waited. The conclave homeworld was 11 light hours away. The response would take 22 hours to arrive, minimum. She looked out her viewport at the shape of the fleet, or the part of it she could see, which was nowhere near all of it. The black hulls, the absence of lights, the closed fists on every forward surface. She pulled up the biometric scan from the meeting room again. The relief signal in Dr. Osai's readings. She understood it now. It was not the relief of someone who had just been told that the threat was manageable. It was the relief of someone who had been carrying a secret for 40 years and had finally been allowed to set it down. She sat with this knowledge for a while. Then she opened her personal log, 3,000 years of notes, observations, reflections on 214 first contacts, and added one new entry. Species 215 is different, she wrote. I don't know yet in what way. I know only that every category I used to understand the others does not fit here. I am revising my working model. I should have done it 18 years ago, when we found our documents on Titan had been read. They were not afraid of us. They were afraid of themselves. I think now that was much more dangerous. On the asterisk consequence, Deo Ademi finished his noodles. They were completely cold by this point. He ate them anyway, because the protein bar situation was what it was, and because eating something completely cold felt honest in a way that he couldn't quite explain. The fleet was fully awake around him. He could feel it in the ship, the particular energy of thousands of systems running together, the hum that wasn't quite a sound but was more like a pressure in the chest. He opened his personal log on his screen. He had been writing in it since he was 22. He wrote, "We just told a 3,000-year-old empire that we weren't interested." The admiral closed the channel like she was ending a business call. I keep waiting for the part where I feel like a hero. It hasn't arrived yet. Mostly I feel tired and slightly concerned about my noodle situation." He closed the log. "Admiral," he said, "Conclave ship is holding position. No aggressive movement." "Good," Morozova said. "What do we do now?" She looked at the view screen. At the black shapes of the fleet, her fleet, 40 years of human fear turned into 40 years of human work turned into this, something the galaxy had no category for yet. "We wait," she said. "They'll need time to think." And then she looked at him. Something that was not quite a smile moved across her face and was gone quickly, like a light reflected off water. "Then they'll want to talk," she said, "and we'll talk." She turned back to the view screen. "But they'll be thinking differently when they do." The Conclave Council took 19 hours to respond. This was fast. In 3,000 years of recorded conclave history, the Council had never moved so quickly on anything. Legislation sat for years. Treaties took decades. The administrative machinery of 49 species and hundreds of star systems moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of something that has never needed to rush. 19 hours was practically a sprint. The response came to a HFY in a narrowband encrypted transmission, the kind reserved for military orders and information the Council did not want traveling on standard channels. She read it twice. The order was simple, 2 lines. No explanation, no qualification, no diplomatic softening. Demonstrate consequence. Do not negotiate with an uncooperative species. The precedent cannot be allowed to stand. And then, because the Council was thorough, reinforcement fleet en route. Estimated arrival 60 hours. Hold position and await. HFY looked at the order for a long time. She looked at her 12 warships on the tactical display. She looked at the sensor ghost count still stuttering and crashing every time it tried to make sense of what was sitting in the dark outside her viewport. She drafted 3 separate responses to the Council. She deleted all 3. She transmitted the order to her fleet commanders and then did something she had not done in over a century of service. She went to her cabin, sat down on the edge of her bunk, and stared at the floor for 11 minutes. Then she stood up, put her uniform straight, walked back to the bridge. She was, above all things, a professional. Vrethkai received the order to proceed 1 hour later, forwarded from a HFY with minimal annotation. He was the commanding admiral of the Conclave's pacification fleet, 12 warships, the finest in the Conclave's military inventory, crewed by soldiers who had run 11 campaigns between them and had never lost one. He read the order, confirmed his fleet status, and began running the tactical calculations. He was not afraid. He was too old and too experienced for fear. He had 40 years in the Conclave's military. He had studied human civilization extensively during the approach to this system, their history, their military technology, their capability ranges. Type 1.4 civilization. Single system. No interstellar military record. No known fleet of any kind beyond atmospheric defense satellites and a handful of orbital stations. The scout data was clear. The Conclave had been watching Earth since before humans discovered electricity. What was outside his viewport did not match the scout data. He was aware of this discrepancy. He had factored it into his calculations. What his sensors could resolve of the human fleet, and his sensors were also struggling, also crashing and rebooting, also failing to produce a reliable count, suggested a force of significant size. Size alone was not the variable. Size without quality was noise. He had 12 of the best warships in the known galaxy. He gave the order to advance. Deo had been watching the engagement clock since Morozova said navigation free. This was the habit. This was the thing he did. His first systems instructor at the Naval Academy, a lean woman from New Zealand who moved like she was angry at gravity, had told him once, "Keep your eye on the clock, Lieutenant. because the battle happens in time, not space, and if you lose the clock, you lose everything. He had never stopped doing it, even in drills, even in the long, quiet deployments when nothing happened for months. The clock was the one honest thing in a fight. 0 minutes, the Conclave fleet began to move. 0 minutes 14 seconds, Admiral Morozova said 3 words, swarm formation, go. The Conclave's doctrine of engagement was elegant. Centuries of refinement had produced something beautiful in its logic, a system that maximized effect while minimizing the kind of destruction that devalued conquered territory. Establish range. Identify command ships. Disable rather than destroy where possible. Issue final warnings in sequence. Move through the stages of escalation like a piece of music moving through its movements. Deliberate, structured, giving the opponent time at each stage to make the rational choice. It was a doctrine designed for opponents who shared certain assumptions. Opponents who would form a line, opponents who would issue challenges, opponents who would observe the formal beginning of hostilities. The Black Armada did not form a line. It swarmed. Not chaotically, Vrethkai would come to understand this later, in the escape pod with a lot of time to think, but with a coordination that looked like chaos and was actually something much more precise. The human ships moved the way a school of fish moves, the way a flock of birds changes direction, simultaneously, with no visible central signal, every unit responding to the whole in real time. They did not try to establish range, they closed it. Vast. The first 3 Conclave ships were simply gone before anyone finished processing that the engagement had started. Not disabled, not damaged and retreating, gone. 1 minute 44 seconds. Deo watched the clock. His station shuddered once, a far-off concussion through the hull, someone else's problem for the moment. He didn't look up. Contact report, Morozova said. 3 Conclave vessels down, said the tactical officer. Remaining 9 are reforming. They're trying to establish a line formation. Don't let them, Morozova said. Wings 3 and 7 acknowledge. 3 minutes 0 seconds. The consequence shook hard. A beam weapon. It hit the port hull and did nothing to the interior except make a sound like a cathedral bell being struck by something that had no business striking cathedral bells. Deo gripped the edge of his station and kept his eyes on the clock. The Conclave's weapons were excellent. He knew this from the technical assessments, from the intelligence files, from the 40 years of engineering decisions made by people who had read those files and designed the asterisk consequences asterisk hull plating around them. The hull held. It was supposed to hold. They had spent 11 years making sure it would hold. Status, he said to his secondary screen. Hull integrity 94%. No breach, no casualties. Thank you, he said, to no one in particular. 5 minutes 11 seconds. 6 Conclave vessels. Vrethkai ran the numbers. He ran them again. He ran them a 3rd time, because the first 2 results had produced values that he did not believe. The weight of fire coming from the human formation, the number of weapons being discharged per second, the coverage, the precision, the total destructive output, was consistent with approximately 600 Conclave warships. He had 12. He ran the count on the human fleet again. His sensors returned a number that changed every few seconds because his sensors were not able to maintain a stable contact list. What he could see, what he could manually track, what the fragmentary data suggested. It was nowhere near 600 ships. But the weight of fire was. He understood in that moment something about human engineering philosophy that the Conclave's 14,000 years of observation had failed to record. They had watched humans build. They had cataloged the weapons, measured the output, assessed the capability ranges. They had a complete technical file. What the file did not contain was the variable of what humans had built specifically for this conversation. Not for general defense, not for hypothetical conflict, for this asterisk, for the moment a conclave fleet showed up in their system. Every weapon on every hull was calibrated for one purpose, and one purpose only. They had spent 40 years making it hit exactly as hard as it needed to hit. 7 conclave vessels. Evasive, he began. Sir, said his tactical officer, they're not targeting our weapon systems. He turned, what? They're targeting our engines. He looked at the tactical feed. The human weapons were precise. They were hitting propulsion, communications relays, the specific systems that allowed a ship to move and to call for help, not the weapons, not the crew sections. They were not trying to destroy his fleet. They were trying to stop it. 8 vessels. He thought about the distinction. He thought about what it meant that they had made that choice, that someone on the other side had looked at this engagement and decided to stop rather than eliminate. He did not find it comforting. A species that chose to stop you was a species that had made a decision. It was more frightening than a species that simply wanted to hurt you, because it implied they had thought about what came after. 7 minutes, 0 seconds. 9 conclave vessels. Deo was writing in his log in his head, the way he did when the actual log wasn't open. He was narrating himself. We are 9 minutes into the first military engagement between humanity and an alien civilization, and I have eaten cold noodles, gripped my station twice, and at no point felt anything that resembled heroism. I feel like myself at a very stressful job. I suppose that is what this is. A job. A very specific job that 40 years of other people's work made possible. I feel bad that I can't feel more. I keep waiting for the moment. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe the moment was the 40 years. 8 minutes, 6 seconds. All conclave vessels disabled, the tactical officer said. 1 remaining, engines out, communications out. She's leaking, he checked his screen, something green. Morozova said, all wings hold. They held. The last conclave ship hung in space and leaked its green light into the dark and didn't move. Around it, in a formation that was too precise to be accidental and too large to be comfortable, the Black Armada held position and was very still and very dark and very quiet. The engagement clock read 8 minutes and 22 seconds. 8 minutes, 22 seconds. Deo looked at the number for a moment. Then he looked at his noodles. They were cold and had been cold for 40 minutes, and he ate the rest of them anyway because the body wants what the body wants, and what his body wanted right now was something ordinary. Vrethkai opened a channel to the conclave homeworld from the last functioning communications relay on his ship. His tactical officer had rerouted 3 systems to make this possible. He had 4 minutes before the relay failed completely. He was calm. He had decided to be calm the way you decide to hold a door open in a hurricane, because there was no alternative, and because something in him refused to let this moment be undignified. He thought carefully about what to say. Do not send another pacification fleet, he transmitted. This is my formal recommendation. A pause. Then the Council's automated receiver, hundreds of light towers away, pinged confirmation. He thought about stopping there. He thought about leaving it simple and professional and letting the tactical data speak for itself. He didn't. We don't have enough ships, he said. I don't mean today's fleet. I mean all of them, our complete military inventory. We don't have enough ships for what they have already built. He checked the relay, 2 minutes left. And I don't think they've stopped building, he said. I think we interrupted them. I think this is not finished. 1 minute. We studied them for 14,000 years, he said. We studied them and we were confident, and I believed in that confidence completely. I want the record to show that. He paused. I also want the record to show that I believe our confidence was the mistake, not our data. Our data was accurate. What we failed to study was what they were capable of becoming if they had sufficient motivation. The relay counter reached 0. He closed the channel. Outside his viewport, the Black Armada held its position. Thousands of black ships in the dark, lights off, fists on their hulls, silent and waiting. He looked at them for a long time. HFY was already in her escape pod when her ship's hull began to give. Not from weapons fire. The human fleet hadn't touched her ship, the diplomatic vessel, which she noted with a strange, detached clarity as a very deliberate choice, but from the structural damage that had been transmitted through the battle's shockwaves. She had 20 minutes in the pod before the distress system would guide her to the nearest safe recovery point. She spent the first 10 minutes writing a transmission. Not to the Conclave homeworld, to Dr. Osei. She wrote, "I have reviewed my biological data from our meeting. The anomaly I cataloged and set aside was not noise. I understand now what it was." She sent it and didn't wait for a reply. Then she looked through the pod's small viewport at the Black Armada. At the shape of it, the scale of it, the way it simply existed asterisk in space without announcing itself or justifying itself, as if it had been there all along, and the galaxy had simply not been paying attention. She pulled up the heading the fleet was running. She ran the coordinates. Her homeworld. She opened a channel. Her voice, for the first time in 500 years of diplomacy, was not quite level. "They are coming here," she said. Then she closed the channel and sat in the small pod in the dark and looked at the stars and thought, for the first time in a very long time, about what it felt like to not know what came next. It felt, she realized slowly, like fear. She sat with the sensation, turned it over, examined it. So this, she thought, is what it felt like to them. She sat with that for a while too. Outside, the Black Armada set its heading and began to move. The Conclave homeworld was called HFY in the oldest Conclave language. The translation was, "the place that does not fall." It had earned the name. In 3,000 years of Conclave civilization, it had never been attacked, never threatened, never looked out at the dark between stars with anything that resembled fear, because the Conclave had always been the thing in the dark that other civilizations feared. It was the center, the safe place, the capital of 49 species and hundreds of worlds. It was beautiful, enormous blue oceans, 3 moons, a skyline that had been built over centuries to look like something between a forest and a dream, 14 billion people, the oldest libraries in the known galaxy, buildings that had stood longer than some human civilizations. The Black Armada dropped out of transit at 600, Conclave Standard Time. It did not announce itself. It did not need to. The Conclave's early warning systems saw them coming 11 hours before arrival, the transit signatures, the mass readings, the sheer weight of what was moving through space toward the homeworld. The emergency council session had already been running for 9 of those 11 hours. 49 species in one room, arguing. This was not unusual. 49 species in one room was always arguing. 3,000 years of civilization had not solved the problem of 49 species trying to agree on anything. What was unusual was the subject of the argument, and the speed at which the arguing was giving way to something quieter and much less comfortable. The fleet count had been transmitted by Vrethkai before his relay died, then by a HFY from her escape pod, then by the homeworld's own sensors, which were better than both and still couldn't produce a number that held still long enough to trust. The Conclave Council speaker, a being of immense age and political experience, who had navigated 3,000 years of interstellar diplomacy without ever raising his voice, sat in the center chair and looked at the sensor display and did something no one in the chamber had ever seen him do. He folded his hands. He was quiet. This, more than anything, made the room go still. "Dr. Os," came aboard the Consequence for the final approach. She was still carrying the mug. Deo had long since stopped being surprised by this. The mug had become a fact of the universe, like gravity, like the speed of light, like the certainty that his noodles would always be lukewarm. The mug existed. The mug traveled. The mug went wherever Dr. Osai went, and that was simply how things were. She looked different from when he had seen her on the broadcast feeds in Geneva. Same blazer, same gray hair, same reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. But something in the way she stood had changed, a looseness in the shoulders, a quality of attention that had shifted from careful to simply present, as if she had put down something heavy and was noticing how much lighter she felt without it. Admiral Morozova gave her the bridge. This was not a ceremonial gesture. Morozova was the most precise person Deo had ever served under. Everything she did was deliberate. Nothing was symbolic without also being functional. She gave Osai the bridge because Osai was the right person for what came next, and because the bridge was where the right person needed to be. Morozova went and stood to the left of the main view screen and crossed her arms and watched. Outside, the conclave homeworld filled the view screen. 3 moons, the blue oceans, the skyline that looked like a forest made of light. "Open a channel," Osai said. The council speaker took the channel personally. He had been in this room, in this chair, for longer than most human civilizations had been literate. He had negotiated with warlords and philosophers and scientists and priests. He had ended 3 internal conclave conflicts that his predecessors had started. He had a gift for knowing what a situation needed, when to speak and when to listen, when to offer and when to wait. He looked at the face on the screen. The human woman, the blazer, the mug. He had been briefed extensively on Dr. Nadja Ussa over the past 30 hours. He had read everything the conclave's 14,000-year observation record had on her, specifically her career, her academic work, her family history, her known decision-making patterns. He was not unprepared. He was nonetheless unprepared. Because the face on the screen did not have the expression of a victor. It did not have the expression of fury or triumph, or the kind of cold satisfaction that a species sometimes wore when the power balance finally shifted in its favor. He had seen all of those expressions. He knew what they meant and what they demanded and how to work with them. Dr. Ussa looked like someone finishing a long task that needed to be finished. Nothing more, nothing less. "Speaker," she said. "Dr. Ussa," he said. "Humanity has a document for you." She took a sip from the mug. "It acknowledges your civilization's achievements, notes your potential, offers specific terms." A pause. "You have 48 hours." The room behind the speaker, the 49 species, the council members, the aides and analysts and military advisors, was completely silent. He did not look at them. He kept his eyes on the screen. "And the alternative," he said. She looked at him steadily. "We decline to specify the alternative. We find it uncivilized." The conclave's 48 hours lasted 31. The speaker requested direct communication with Morozova 6 hours in. She took the channel in her cabin, alone, door closed. Duh didn't know what was said. He didn't ask. He noted the time it started and the time it ended, 40 minutes, and wrote it in his log. HFY, recovered from her escape pod and transported to the Humwald, requested communication with Morozova 12 hours in. Morozova took this one on the bridge, with the channel open for the crew to hear. HFY had spent 31 hours in a pod and then on a transport, and then in a medical bay and then in the council chamber, and she had used that time to think. She was the kind of mind that worked best under pressure, that produced its clearest thoughts when the circumstances were most uncomfortable. She had spent 3,000 years learning this about herself. She had a question. One question, because one was enough. "What did we miss?" she said. "We studied you, 14,000 years of observation. Every piece of data we had said you were not capable of this. Not in 40 years, not in 100 years. The capability curve didn't allow for it. The resource requirements didn't allow for it. The political will didn't allow for it. A pause. We did everything correctly. What did we miss? Mazova was quiet. The bridge was very still. Da noticed that he wasn't breathing and corrected this. You studied what we built, Mazova said. You watched our technology, our weapons, our ships. You measured our output and calculated our trajectory and built a model of what we were capable of. Yes. You never asked why we built it. HFY said nothing. 14,000 years of records, Mazova said. In all of them, did you ever find a human civilization that stopped building after it was safe? A long pause. No, HFY said quietly. We don't build because we need to, Mazova said. We build because something in us cannot stop. It's not strategy, it's not planning, it's just what we are. She paused. Your model was accurate, your data was accurate. You missed the thing underneath the data, the reason for all of it. Which is? Mazova looked at the Vyuskran, at the conclave Humboldt hanging there in the blue light of its 3 moons. We were afraid, she said. We have always been afraid. Of each other first, you'd know that from your records, we were very thorough about being afraid of each other. And then, 18 years ago, we found your documents on Titan, and we understood that the universe was larger and more complicated than we had known, and we became afraid of something bigger. She let this sit. When we are afraid enough, she said, there is no capability curve. There is no resource limit. There is only the thing we are building and the reason we are building it. She closed the channel. Knew I such duh, she thought. Duh was writing in his log, the real one, not the one in his head. We are outside the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy, and we have come to reverse their document on them. Fear as a document, 40 years as a document, 8 minutes and 22 seconds as a document. I thought I would feel something that matched the size of this, something to put next to it in the historical record. I feel like myself on a long shift. I feel like my back hurts and I need real food and 8 hours of sleep that I'm not going to get. I think maybe that's the point, though. The galaxy expected us to be afraid of them. We were. We just didn't let the fear be the end of the sentence. We let it be the beginning. He thought about this for a moment, then he added, my back still hurts, though. He closed the log. The conclave's response came at 31 hours and 4 minutes. The message was brief. One word in the conclave's formal diplomatic language, which translated precisely and without ambiguity into every known language in its database. The translation into English was, yes. Dr. Ussa read it at her station on the bridge. She read it twice. She held the mug in both hands. It had gone cold again. It was always going cold, and looked at the word on the screen. Mazova read it from her chair and said nothing. Duh read it from his station and had approximately 11 different feelings simultaneously, which was too many to process in sequence. So he processed none of them and simply sat with the total weight of all 11 at once. After a while he said, so what do we do with yes? Nobody answered immediately. This was, it turned out, a real question. The 40 years of preparation had covered everything. The construction, the training, the tactical doctrine, the diplomatic framework for the approach, the reverse ultimatum, the specific terms of the document Ussa had prepared. They had planned for every variable. They had planned for Ustaruskna. They had planned for silence. They had planned for hostility. They had not fully planned for yes. Mazova looked at Ussa. Ussa looked at Mazova. We proceed to the signing, Ussa said. Yes. And after the signing, Mazova turned back to the Vyuskran, to the Humboldt, to the 3 moons and the blue oceans and the skyline that looked like a forest. We have a very long list of things we want, she said. We take our time, we go through the list. She was quiet for a moment. And we are patient, she said. We have learned how to be patient. The formal signing was scheduled for 48 hours after the Estarusk Yus arrived, the conclave's 48, mirrored back, though no one at the table acknowledged this, and no one needed to. HFY attended. She had asked to. The council had granted it. She sat across the table from Dr. Ussa and watched the document pass from hand to hand, signature to signature, seal to seal, and thought about the 14,000 years of observation that had produced every assumption she had brought to Geneva. The assumptions had been correct. The data had been accurate. The model had been wrong. After the signing, she remained at the table while the others filed out. The council members, the aides, the recorders, the military advisors, the representatives of 49 species who had come to see this with their own eyes. Dr. Ussa remained too. They sat across from each other in the empty room. HFY looked at the mug, world's ukiest diplomat. I read the translation, she said. I know, Ussa said. Do you believe it? Ussa considered this. She turned the mug in her hands, looking at the words, the way you look at something you have looked at 1,000 times and occasionally look at again with fresh eyes. I think I was exactly okay enough, she said. Not more, just enough. You changed everything. The 40 years changed everything. I just showed up at the end. HFY looked at the table, at the signed document sitting between them, its seals still drying. The most important document in conclave history, possibly the most important document in the history of the known galaxy. What happens now, she said. Not the formal terms, not the treaty language, what actually happens. Ussa looked at her. You treat us like equals, she said. Not eventually, not after we've proven ourselves, now from today completely. And if we don't? Osai stood up. She picked up her mug. She looked at HFY with the same expression she had worn in Geneva, the one that lived behind the eyes, not in the mouth. We built the fleet in 40 years the first time, she said. We know how to do it now. She walked to the door. She stopped without turning around. She set the mug down on the table, deliberately, carefully, like placing something important somewhere it belonged. Then she walked out. HFY looked at the mug for a long time after the door closed. World's okayest diplomat. She reached out and turned it slightly, centering it on the table. She thought it should probably stay there. She thought it probably should never be moved. The signing was over. The documents were sealed and recorded and transmitted across the conclave's networks at the speed of light, out to 49 species and hundreds of worlds, and the farthest edges of the largest civilization humanity had ever made contact with. The message was simple, terms agreed, new framework in effect. On Earth, people watch screens. Not the serious kind of watching, not the holding breath, shoulders up, hands clasped together watching that had been running for days. Something different. The kind of watching that happens when the thing you were afraid of resolving has resolved, and the body doesn't know immediately what to do with the absence of that specific fear, so it just watches and breathes and waits to figure out what comes next. In Lagos, a man sat in front of his television with a cup of tea he had made and forgotten about, gone cold on the table beside him, watching a news feed that kept switching between experts who were all trying to explain what had just happened to the history of the species. In Oslo, a woman sat on her balcony in the cold and looked at the sky, clear tonight, stars visible, the moon in its third quarter, and thought about the years she had spent on the dark side of that moon, welding hull plating in a suit that was always slightly too cold in the shoulders, and said nothing to anyone, because some things don't need words. In 100 cities and 10,000 living rooms, and in hospital corridors where people had wheeled beds toward windows to look at screens, humanity sat with what it had done and tried to find the right feeling for it. The right feeling, it turned out, was complicated. The formal celebrations lasted 3 days on Earth. There were speeches. There were broadcasts. There were enormous gatherings in city squares across every continent, people standing together in the dark, looking up at a sky that felt different now, not more dangerous, but more real, more present, more full of things that were no longer theoretical. The speeches were mostly good. Some of them were very good. A few of them were the kind of thing that would be quoted for generations, lines that arrived at the exact right words for a feeling that the moment needed named. Admiral Morozova did not give a speech. She was asked 3 times by 3 separate government offices on 2 continents. She declined all 3 through her aide with a politeness that left no room for appeal. She was not a speechmaker. She had never been a speechmaker. She had built a fleet and commanded it and done the work that the work required, and she considered that sufficient. She stayed on the asterisk consequence. The ship was quiet in a way that ships rarely are. The crew had been given stand-down orders, meals, rest, personal communications, the ordinary recovery that follows a very long period of not being ordinary. The corridors were emptier than usual. The bridge ran on skeleton staff. The hum of the engines was low and steady, the ship holding its position in space, the way a person holds a position in a chair when they are tired and don't want to move yet. Morozova walked through the ship alone. She did this sometimes. Had done it for 11 years, since she first came aboard during the final fitting stages when the ship still smelled of new metal and sealant and hadn't yet accumulated the particular character that ships accumulate over years of people living in them. She knew every corridor, every junction, the place on Deck 3 where the lighting panel had always been slightly brighter on the left side than the right, and the engineers had checked it 4 times and never found a cause, and eventually everyone had just accepted it as a fact about Deck 3. The sound the hull made at this distance from this sun, a very low, very faint resonance, like the ship breathing. She walked to the observation deck. It was a small room at the ship's midsection, a circular space, no chairs, a curved window that looked out at 180 degrees of space. The designers had argued about whether to include it. Observation decks were not tactical. They served no operational function. They were, in a military vessel built for a specific and serious purpose, somewhat embarrassing. Morozova had insisted on it. She stood at the window and looked out. The conclave homeworld was visible at this distance, a blue-gray shape with the suggestion of its 3 moons arranged around it. Beautiful. Still beautiful. She had noticed it when they arrived and had noted it and moved on, because it was not relevant, and she had spent 11 years practicing the art of moving past irrelevant things without letting them take up space. It was relevant now, perhaps, or she was allowing it to be. She looked at it for a while. The black Armada was out there too, visible if you knew what to look for, invisible if you didn't. All those black hulls in the dark, running lights still off, holding their formation, waiting for the next order. They had a heading set, technically, Earth, the transit home, but the order to begin hadn't been given yet. She hadn't given it. She stood at the window and thought about why. 40 years ago, she had been 19 years old, studying engineering at a university in Moscow, when the scout documents from Titan were declassified, not to the public, which still didn't know, but to a specific list of institutions and government bodies that needed to begin making very careful decisions very quietly. She had been 22 when she signed her first document that she was not allowed to discuss. She had been 31 when she was assigned to what was then called the Deep Infrastructure Project, which was not called that internally, which was called nothing internally, which was referred to only by a set of coordinates and a construction schedule. She had spent the years between 31 and 61 doing one thing, building this fleet, recruiting, training, designing, testing, rebuilding after the designs that failed, starting over when the materials weren't right, running the simulations, running them again, running them until the numbers were not hopeful but certain. She had done this with 22 other people at the senior level, and hundreds more below them, and thousands more below that. And none of them had ever said the words out loud in a public space, or written them in an unencrypted document, or allowed themselves to imagine, fully, the moment it would be real. Because imagining it made it fragile. And it could not be fragile. She looked at the fleet in the dark and thought about the 22 senior people. 3 were still alive, including her. 19 had died before the waking order came, natural causes mostly, because they had been old people doing old people's work, and time had not paused to accommodate the schedule. She had known all 19, some of them well. She stood at the window and thought about them for a while. Not with grief. Grief was something she processed privately, in small amounts, at carefully selected intervals, and this was not one of those intervals. With acknowledgement. With the particular kind of attention you give something that deserves to be witnessed even if no one else is watching. New ICHTO, she thought, but gently this time, not the fighting version. The version that simply means, so this is what is. Then she took her personal log out of her jacket pocket. The real one, the handwritten one, the notebook that had been with her for 25 years and was on its 3rd binding because the first 2 had given out. She opened it to the current page. She wrote, "We were afraid. We are less afraid now. I don't know yet what that means for what we become." She held the pen above the page for a moment and then added, "Turn on the running lights." She closed the notebook. She went to the bridge. "All wings," she said, "running lights on." For a moment, nothing seemed to change. Then one by one, and then in clusters, and then all at once, the black Armada lit up. Thousands of ships, in the dark outside the most powerful homeworld in the known galaxy. Turning their lights on for the first time. Not warnings, not aggression, just presence. Just we are here and we are not hiding and we are not ashamed of what we built and we are not going to apologize for it. On the conclave homeworld below, in the council chamber where the speaker was still sitting with his hands folded, someone pointed at the sensor display. He looked. A long time ago, he had been young. He had seen things in his youth that had stayed with him across the centuries, images and moments and experiences that the passage of time had not diminished. He had a good memory for beauty, even when it frightened him. He looked at the display, at the lights coming on one by one across the dark. "That," he said, to no one in particular, "is either the most dangerous thing I have ever seen or the most extraordinary." His aide said, "Which one is it?" He thought about it. "Both," he said, simultaneously. "I think that may be the point." Deo Ademi finished the last of the real food that had been brought aboard when Dr. Osai came. Actual food, not protein bars. Rice and stew that someone in the galley had made from actual ingredients because there had been a supply run, and for once the asterisk consequence was eating like adults. He ate it at his station because old habits were what they were. He watched the lights come on across the fleet on his secondary screen, a smaller version of what was visible through the view screen, the Armada coming out of the dark one ship at a time. He opened his log. The Admiral turned on the lights, asterisk, he wrote. "I have been on this ship for 2 years and I have never seen the running lights on before. They are a standard green-white, the kind every human ship has used for decades. Nothing remarkable about them. They are the most remarkable thing I have ever seen. We are outside the capital world of the largest civilization in the galaxy. We just reversed a 3,000-year-old document on them. We did it in 8 minutes and 22 seconds, and then we talked, and then they said yes, and then we turned on our lights. There will be a history of this, probably several histories. They will argue about what it meant and what it cost and what it made us. They will probably argue about the Admiral. I will tell anyone who asks about the noodles. I think the noodles are important. I think the fact that we did the largest thing our species has ever done, while somebody's noodles were cold, and someone's back hurt, and someone was quietly hopping, the protein bar situation would improve. I think that's the part that matters. I think that's the thing worth remembering. We were not heroes today. We were just humans. We were just humans who had been afraid long enough that the fear turned into something else. I am going to sleep now. I have been awake for a very long time, and I need to lie down in the dark and stop having feelings for approximately 8 hours. Tomorrow we go home. He closed the log. He stood up. He stretched, and his back made a sound that reminded him of things he didn't want to think about. He went to his bunk. The mug stayed on the table in the signing room. The conclave aides found it after the human delegation departed. They ran it through the cultural analysis database. The text, the ceramic construction, the clear signs of years of use, the faint ring stains from 100 mornings of coffee. World's okayest diplomat. Human humor subtype, self-deprecating. Context, gift item, typically ironic. Manufactured in a human country called China, exported globally, purchased at airports or gift shops, given to people who work in positions they take seriously without wanting to be taken too seriously. The archive team requested it for the historical collection. The request was approved in 3 hours, which was, by conclave administrative standards, instantaneous. They gave it a case. A real one, temperature-controlled, with proper lighting, and a description placard that was revised 4 times before anyone was satisfied with the wording. The final description read, ceramic vessel, human manufacture, present at the signing of the OSI Conclave Treaty, Year 3 of the new framework. Origin, Geneva, Earth. Purpose, unknown to external observers. Significance, considerable. Below the case in smaller text, because the archivist believed in footnotes even when the subjects of history did not. Believed to have been carried throughout the entire diplomatic engagement by Dr. Nadia Osai, Earth's lead negotiator. She left it deliberately. We don't know exactly what she meant by this. We think she meant us to wonder. The Black Armada went home. Most of it. 500 ships stayed. Not in an aggressive position, not weapons forward, not in blockade formation. They simply held a position at the edge of the system, far enough to be outside anyone's immediate space, close enough to be visible on sensors. They turned their running lights off again after the first day. They didn't explain this decision. No transmission, no note. The ships were simply there, and then the lights were simply off, and the conclave sensors showed them holding their position with the patience of something that had been waiting for a very long time and had learned that waiting was not the same as leaving. The Conclave Council discussed them for 6 consecutive sessions. The speaker said very little during these discussions. He listened. He watched the sensor display during the breaks, when the chamber emptied and he sat alone with the feed and the 500 dark shapes at the edge of his system. On the 7th session, when his most senior military advisor asked what protocol they should follow for the unauthorized presence of a foreign fleet in conclave space, the speaker looked at him for a long time. "Study them," he said. "Sir, we studied humanity for 14,000 years," he said. "We cataloged everything they built, everything they made, everything they produced." He looked at the sensor display. "We missed the thing underneath. We will not make that mistake again." He looked back at his advisor. "Study them, not what they do, why they do it. Start with that and work outward." His advisor made a note. "And the protocol for their presence in our space." The speaker turned back to the display. The 500 dark shapes. No lights. A closed fist on every hull, too far away to see but present in the mind because he had looked it up after Geneva and hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. A closed fist, not raised, not open, not a weapon, not a greeting. Just closed. Waiting. "Leave them alone," the speaker said. He folded his hands. "I think they've earned a little patience from us." The consequence crossed back into the solar system on a Wednesday morning, Sol time, with the sun rising behind it, the way the sun rises behind something that has come a long way and is coming home. Morozova stood at the viewport and watched Earth get bigger. She had not been home in 2 years. She had a small apartment in a city she liked, full of books she had been meaning to read, and a window that looked out over water, and a neighbor who played music at hours that were technically unreasonable, but was otherwise perfectly acceptable as a human being. She was going to sleep for a very long time. She looked at Earth, the blue and the white and the brown and the green of it, the colors that no other planet she had ever seen had in quite that specific combination, the colors that the body recognizes as home before the mind has finished thinking about it. She had spent 40 years being afraid. She was still afraid, not of the conclave. That particular fear had changed shape and moved to a different room in her chest, something she would need to monitor, but that was no longer the loudest thing. Afraid of the next thing, whatever the next thing was, because she had learned in 61 years of being human that there was always a next thing. But she was less afraid than she had been. And she was home. She watched Earth for a while in the quiet of the observation deck, with the ship humming around her, and the crew standing down to their bunks, and the stars very still, and the sun coming up over the curve of the world she had spent her entire adult life trying to protect. Then she went to her cabin, set her notebook on the desk, lay down on her bunk and closed her eyes. Outside, in the dark that was not as dark as it used to be, the black Armada came home. Most of it. The rest held their position at the edge of the conclave space, lights off, fists on their hulls, quiet and patient and present. Just in case. Just so the galaxy remembered. Just so nobody, anywhere, made the mistake of forgetting what it had cost humanity to stop being afraid, and what humanity was prepared to pay to stay that way. The galaxy was very polite after that. Very, very polite.